Hi there, glad you could join us. What are your expectations like? Are you easy to please? Are you fussy? Can you be disappointed easily? Or do you avoid any hype as not to have expectations at all? Can you be surprised? What expectations do we place on others? What impact do those expectations have on the other person? We may have expectations on public figures, and when there's a scandal, or if there's a company that's embezzled, or if there's a care service that's not up to scratch. You see, reliability is maybe one of the expectations we have, whether to have safe travel, or have good health service, or how our work environment should be, or how we're educated. How realistic are all these expectations? Now, we may have experienced disappointment in family or even church over the years. What picture did we have at the start, and what does it look like now? Much of that can be applied in the same way when we have expectations in faith. We place expectations on God, and if they're not met, what happens to us? Were the expectations we had about God the right ones? What picture of God did we have before we were disappointed? And was it the right one? You see, we've been looking at the importance of John's stories and focusing on the signs. They point to Jesus to help us understand him more, but also how we can connect with God more. And this sign is about expectations. To manage our expectations is in one way to know how we can connect with God in a more helpful way. So the story, which is about feeding the multitude, appears in the Gospels, in all of them. But we are in John's Gospel at this moment for our story, told by John himself. And we need to find out what is distinct about this from other ways it's told. Now, the focus on this miracle is not to be a miracle of God with some divine bottomless food bank. The focus on the story here is not to be how it is done, it's more the impact on the disciples and the crowd when it happens. So, what happened? Well, the unique part was the reaction of the crowd. Jesus uses this story, or this opportunity, through John, telling us it here about how the crowd misunderstood the sign for themselves. They had it wrong about Jesus and who he was. You see, when the people saw the sign of the multitude being fed, they began talking of Jesus as the coming prophet. When Jesus heard that the crowd wanted to make him king, he kind of withdrew. The sign had clearly not led them to a true faith. Indeed, faith's not mentioned at all. John wanted to show from this sign is that just because people might have an experience of God, it doesn't mean they know or understand God anymore. The danger is that it may reinforce an image or idea of God, an image that's not based on faith, but on unhelpful expectations. You see, the image they had was of Jesus, one of us, a politician, a military king, to get rid of these Romans who were occupying their land. So why did the crowd not work it out correctly? Well, for one thing, the story really resonates strongly with the Exodus story. The story in the Gospel is set at the time of the Passover. That was a special feast to mark the escape of God's people from Egypt. As Moses had a vast crowd following him, so did Jesus. As Moses was called a prophet, so was Jesus in this story. As Moses faced the desperation of a hungry crowd, so Jesus was faced with a hungry crowd, just as Moses faced the complaints of God's people coming out of Egypt. So Jesus knew that this hungry crowd out in the wilderness was facing the same scenario. And just as Moses called for manna from heaven, so we have Jesus providing bread for the people. Could this Jesus be a new Moses, they might have thought? They had a picture in their mind and they were jumping to conclusions. Indeed, they were forgetting the whole story. You see, God's people led by Moses were never satisfied. They were in survival mode and focused on their basic needs. God had got them into this mess. He should get them out of it. Moses was left with trying to manage expectations. Moses had led the Israelites out of a land where they were slaves, but secure in that slavery. So why not these oppressed people in Jesus' day be led out of the rule of their own land? Many Jews hated the thought that this might never happen in their lifetime. They wanted to be free from Roman rule. So they were looking for a leader who would defeat the Romans for them. Now, we might respond by saying to ourselves, well, that's not a bad thing actually. Indeed, it's a good thing to be liberated from your oppressors. Surely that's a fair enough thing to expect from Jesus, even in these circumstances. But there's more going on in this story than a revolution. Rather, it's a revelation that they needed to be free not just from the Romans, but one of the greatest enemies that's been faced in every generation, death itself. You see, sometimes we fall into the trap that we think God doesn't meet our expectations. When what this story in this fourth sign is telling us is this, is that our expectations are no match to what God has planned for us out of his goodness. The challenge here is that we might have fallen into the trap of making our picture of God in our heads too small. And if that's the case, then we're always going to be bigger than the God we believe in. It's like when I've had a conversation with someone who say that they don't believe in God. Do you know, I'd be interested to find out what God they've imagined that they don't believe in. Like the crowd, they have wrong expectations. Maybe that has been our journey too. Maybe in this lockdown, we have had expectations absolutely shattered. Well, maybe we can learn from Philip and the boy in the story. Now, Jesus has a conversation with Philip, and it's interesting that Philip is the choice in the story because he has a discussion with Jesus about what we should do next. And for one, Philip was the local. He knew what would be involved and what supplies would be or not be available. And sometimes when we know more, it can affect how we look at things. You see, Philip could estimate the cost, the distance, the suppliers. He could do the sums. He knew they were up against it, and that can be a real test on a person's faith. You see, when we think we know all the facts, or we think we thought it through thoroughly, maybe we feel we've got no options left. But do we have the full picture? You see, there's a clue also in the boys' packed lunch about the extent of what people will do when expectations are shattered. Now, we may have heard this story many times, but one thing I picked up here, it wasn't just the loaves and the fishes, it was barley loaves. Barley was livestock food. So think about it. This boy, from a family, on that day, had made a difficult choice. Feed their boy or feed the animals. If you don't feed your boy, he goes hungry. If you don't feed the animals, you don't have enough food for the family in the future. This is how close this boy was to the breadline, literally. And yet he was the one that presented his packed lunch. It's the boy who gives what he has away, even when he was running out of choices. Now, it's pointless to trip over a discussion on whether Jesus multiplied the bread or this offering by the boy had a massive guilt trip ripple through the crowd who started to share their food, suddenly realising what the boy was prepared to do. You see, the importance of this sign is the impact upon the crowd and the disciples, and to reveal their expectations, whether right or wrong. Sometimes when we are in a place in life where choices are running out, we start to see the nature of who we are and the expectations we have in life, on others, and of God. My talks for John, I've often used TLC as a means to just remember something to take away from today. So T is for think about something. Think about our expectations and what they are before others and before God. Listen to others and what they have gone through and what they are prepared to do and how their faith and trust in Jesus has remained strong. Why don't we care for others who are going through disappointment, who are going through a whole rearrangement of their thoughts about their faith, and just listen and journey with them? Thanks for your time. Take care and stay safe.